Buenas tardes, jóvenes, ¿cómo están? Veo varios de mis estudiantes del curso de ingeniería, así que después tienen que hacer consigo para tomar los puntos. Así que bueno, pero qué bueno que vinieron. Quiero agradecerles por el interés de participar en esta charla. Tenemos dos grandes presentadores que vamos a hablar en primer lugar sobre temas de cambio climático y también es parte de lo que nosotros discutimos en el curso de ingeniería sanitaria. No discutimos propiamente tal cambio climático, si ustedes saben que vemos temas de planificación de infraestructura y en ese contexto Miguel va a explicar al principio los principales impactos que tiene el cambio climático en los recursos hídricos y después hemos invitado al profesor Trevor Bishop, que él presentará sobre temas generales, cómo impacta el cambio climático en la infraestructura, que esto es parte de lo que nosotros vemos en el curso de ingeniería sanitaria. De manera bien breve, después Trevor lo explicará en el principio. Trevor es profesor honorario de la Universidad de Exeter y su principal expertise, bueno, de formación él es hidrogeólogo, pero su principal expertise está relacionado a los temas de regulación. Y él trabajó varios años en compañías de agua potable y saneamiento en Inglaterra, también parte del fundador del International Water Regulator Forum y tiene participación internacional también en varias cosas. Actualmente también se desempeña como asesor del Banco Mundial. Entonces después ahí les va a contar un poco más. Entonces después de la presentación de Miguel, que voy a pasar la palabra ahora, viene la presentación de Leo. Y después dejamos un espacio para preguntas, conversación que ustedes tengan. Los invito a que la presentación de Trevor va a ser por supuesto en inglés. Si tienen algunas consultas también voy a tratar de hacer ahí la traducción y por supuesto pueden hacer las preguntas en inglés si desean. Eso sí que bueno, para comenzar un aplauso por favor para... Profesor Miguel.
Hola, buenas tardes. Hello, Trevor. My presentation is going to be in Spanish, but I try to put my material in English, so you can follow up. So, muchas gracias por estar acá. Este ciclo de seminarios que el profesor Víctor Galvez nos invitó a hacer. Para quienes no me conocen, yo soy Miguel Ángel Lagos Zúñiga, soy académico del Departamento de Obras Civiles y también soy investigador asociado al Centro Avanzado de Tecnología para la Minería. Y les voy a hablar un poquito de Chile, cambio climático, de tendencias que se han observado y de proyecciones. Entonces, en primer lugar, ¿qué hemos observado? Porque podemos ser creedores, tener fe o no en el cambio climático, pero si hemos mirado algo, qué es lo que se espera para Chile y finalmente qué es lo que estamos haciendo como Chile en relación al cambio climático. Entonces, brevemente, en esta diapositiva que debe ser muy conocida, pero muestra un poco la diversidad climática de nuestro territorio. En el norte tenemos temperaturas altas, poca precipitación, mientras que en el sur tenemos climas más húmedos y fríos, y la heterogeneidad espacial responde en el sentido de que nuestros recursos hídricos vienen de distintas fuentes. Y dentro de esta diversidad también, por ejemplo, en este gráfico de acá se muestra la aridez de Chile. Entonces, lo que rescata esta figura es que en el norte vemos puntos rojos y también en el centro, que es decir, estamos en condiciones áridas, mientras que en el sur aparecen condiciones un poco más húmedas. En este contexto hemos evidenciado cambios. Entonces, esta figura es un icono de un paper famoso de Mark Falvey y René Garrot, que se llamaba enfriamiento local en un clima de contexto global, y lo que muestra esta figura es que hay evidencia observada de calentamiento en superficie. Fíjense en la celda de Chillán, Santiago, Curicó, tendencias del orden de cercanas a 0,2 grados por década, pero si nos fijamos en las zonas más altas, por ejemplo en Mendoza, en San Juan, y también acá, en Mendoza y San Juan, y Lagunitas y El Yeso, ese incremento es mayor, es decir, se está calentando más en la cordillera que en el valle. ¿Sí? Es como un mensaje. Pero, además, y contra todo pronóstico, los sectores costeros como La Serena, Valparaíso y Concepción se estaban enfriando. O sea, ¿se está calentando el planeta? Sí. ¿Se está calentando el Chile continental? Sí, pero también existe evidencia de un enfriamiento costero. Por otro lado, y esto es más conocido por todos y todas, es que en las últimas décadas hemos estado embebidos en una megasequía o hipersequía, como se le ha llamado, que ha evidenciado tasas de descenso del orden del 7% por década. Y esta tendencia es súper robusta en casi todo Chile Central. ¿Y por qué destaco Chile Central? Porque es donde vive la mayor cantidad cantidad de la población, ¿no es cierto?, del territorio nacional. Esto es para hablar de disponibilidad, porque nuestra primera fuente de disponibilidad es precipitación. Pero cuando miramos precipitación extrema, escuchamos mucho en la prensa, se está volviendo más intenso, tenemos que adaptar las obras, pero ¿qué tan real es esa tendencia? Y la señal en realidad es que Chile Central, en las distintas estaciones del año, en general está con tendencias negativas. ¿Sí? Se están haciendo menos intensas los eventos, pero en la estación cálida, que es donde hace más calor, y por tanto la nieve está, las temperaturas están más elevadas, el termocero se eleva, puede producir, ¿no es cierto?, crecidas de mayor importancia. Para diseño hidrológico importa el promedio, pero también importa la desviación estándar en un contexto estacionario. Y cuando cruzamos la tendencia de la lluvia máxima diaria con la desviación estándar, la tendencia de la desviación estándar, vemos que en Chile Central, norte y en la parte austral aparece un cuadro positivo donde están evidencia de aumento tanto de los valores medios como de las desviaciones estándar. Y eso impacta directamente en el diseño hidrológico, porque diseñamos cuántas desviaciones estándar nos alejamos del promedio. Entonces, esto ciertamente pone en jaque nuestra infraestructura y cómo nos movemos en ese sentido. Entonces, eso es lo que, en resumen, hemos observado en las últimas décadas. Ahora, ¿qué nos depara el futuro? Y acá en Chile se han hecho muchas iniciativas en ese sentido. Y quiero destacar este informe, que fue uno de los precursores del año 2006, cuando existía la Comisión Nacional del Medio Ambiente, que después mudó al Ministerio del Medio Ambiente, la CONAMA, donde se realizó la primera simulación regional de Chile y empezamos a ver por primera vez estos mapas como de Marte, ¿sí?, de colores rojos, que indicaban un calentamiento, sobre todo cerca del altiplano, en todas las estaciones del año, y también empezamos a ver estas manchas rojas en torno a Chile Central de menos precipitación. Y algunas manchas de incremento en el altiplano, en distintas estaciones del año, pero como en Chile somos bastante centralistas, casi siempre nos quedamos por esas tendencias a la baja. Pero ya en esa época, 2006, ya habían nacido... Ya se hablaba de que hay menos agua, se espera menos agua en Chile Central. Esto, más recientemente, en el año 2018, generó una nueva actualización de simulaciones climáticas regionales y los mapas cálidos en realidad siguen apareciendo. La señal al aumento mediante escenarios de mayor emisión habla de cerca de 2 grados a finales del siglo, y cuando vemos modelos regionales vemos que la señal no es tan intensa. O sea, algo parece diferencia cuando miramos modelos climáticos globales versus modelos climáticos regionales. Pero lo interesante acá es que en esta única realización empezaron a aparecer colores azules. Precipitación aumentaría. Décadas escuchando que la precipitación va a aumentar y aparece de repente una simulación de alta resolución, 10 kilómetros, que dice que la precipitación aumentaría. Y esto creo que no lo escuchamos en las noticias, porque ciertamente pone en jaque todo lo que hemos adaptado a políticas. Entonces esto lo pongo para decir que es un problema difícil, que esto es una realización, pero que existe mucha incertidumbre social. Pero cuando ya vemos un conjunto de esfuerzos, aparece el Atlas de Riesgos Climáticos, impulsado por el Ministerio de Medio Ambiente, que nos dice, por ejemplo, qué se espera para la precipitación. Estas son las climatologías de precipitación anual y estos son los mapas de cambio. Vemos que la señal robusta de modelos de la sexta fase del informe de cambio climático, CM6, dice disminuciones de hasta un 20% en Chile Central, y aparecen estos aumentos en el norte y también aumentos australes, pero son relativamente moderados. Ahora, cuando miramos la precipitación extrema, lo que esto nos dice es que en realidad los tonos rojos se suavizan y los tonos azules se resaltan. Entonces el mensaje es que la precipitación extrema sí se espera, con bastante robustez, que aumente en gran parte del territorio nacional. Entonces esto nuevamente nos pone en jaque como ingenieros e ingenieras, o candidatos y candidatas a ingenieros, de cómo vamos a seguir diseñando nuestra infraestructura. Cuando traducimos esto a recursos hídricos, no puedo no hablar del balance hídrico nacional. que fue un hito también a nivel nacional con el informe del 2022, donde cada uno de estos puntos es una cuenca de Chile. Y los colores es la proyección en precipitación, el eje X, la proyección en caudal, y el eje Y, la proyección en evapotranspiración. Y lo que nos muestra esta figura es que el delta Q en general, los puntos se concentran hacia la izquierda de la línea vertical, es decir, menos agua. Sin embargo, zonas donde también aumenta la precipitación, hay menos caudal. ¿Por qué? Porque aumenta la evapotranspiración. Entonces vemos que los procesos son altamente no lineales y son súper complejos. No es extrapolar que un 10% menos de precipitación se traduce en un 10% menos de caudal, sino que hay todo un proceso hidrológico en el que se transforma el agua en escorrentía. Por último, literatura más reciente, por ejemplo el paper de Nicolás Vázquez y otros en 2025, muestra cómo va a ser el clima en el futuro y cómo es el clima ahora. Y lo que se aprecia es que el desierto está migrando hacia el centro. Es decir, ahora nos podemos quejar del verano. Hay personas acá que sean team verano. Levante la mano. Todavía quedan más personas que en verano. Pero los veranos van a ser más intensos. Y en particular tenemos que adaptarnos a vivir en condiciones más altas. Pero también se indica que el freezing level, el isoterma cero, se estaría desplazando hacia el futuro en 500 metros. ¿Qué significa 500 metros de isoterma cero más alta? Significa que tenemos una contribución de cuencas que puede ser hasta un 10% más para producir escorrentía donde antes se acumulaba nieve. Y eso en este gráfico, que es un poquito más simple de entender, por ejemplo, se muestran los histogramas de isoterma cero históricas en azul y futuras en rojo. Y se ve claramente que se espera condiciones más cálidas, y eso por supuesto trae repercusiones en los recursos hídricos, eventualmente en crecidas. Y ahora finalmente, ¿qué estamos haciendo en Chile sobre esto? Y estamos haciendo otras cosas. Y quiero decirles que tenemos que sentirnos orgullosos y orgullosas de que en verdad Chile está haciendo algunas cosas. No solo algunas, sino que varias. En primer lugar, todo parte, y con más fuerza, con la Ley Marco de Cambio Climático, impulsada por el Ministerio del Medio Ambiente, que empezó a empujar a otros ministerios a rediseñar sus políticas. Y en particular, existe un Plan Nacional de Adaptación al Cambio Climático. El Servicio de Evaluación Ambiental ya pide, por normativa, que cuando presentan un proyecto tiene que estar evaluado para condiciones de cambio climático y presenta lineamientos de qué cosas considerar. Y finalmente también esto llega al Ministerio de Obras Públicas, donde la infraestructura y la edificación tiene que estar acorde a lo que diga el cambio climático. Entonces, el cambio climático es algo importante. Les mostré evidencia, les he mostrado proyecciones, y esto es lo que ha estado haciendo Chile. Llevándolo a un nivel un poco más estudiantil, ¿estamos pasando de curso o no estamos pasando de curso como Chile? Y estamos en Sansano con un 55. Estamos pasando. En el lenguaje más común, 4 pelados. ¿Sí? Estamos haciendo, en términos de acciones políticas, estamos en condiciones como casi suficientes. En términos de, ¿cómo se llama esto? De si somos, en términos de cobertura de tener vegetal, plantas, perdón, vegetación, eso es sumidero de gases de efecto invernadero. Entonces estamos en ese sentido contribuyendo a disminuir el CO2 global, entre otras cosas. Pero en general estamos como ahí. No sé si pasando, pero estamos casi bordeando esa tesis. Y por supuesto, como sociedad nos hemos adaptado bastante. Por ejemplo, cuando yo me formé como ingeniero, hablar de las desaladoras era como casi hablar así ciencia ficción. 2008, por ahí. Desaladoras en verdad se veía así como realidad de países desarrollados. Y hoy en Chile tenemos como catastro de plantas desaladoras. Ciertamente hay temas ambientales, pero existen. La Comisión Nacional del Riego también dice, por ejemplo, cómo recargar acuíferos, que también es algo que se hablaba mucho, pero que en realidad la concreto, cómo se hace recarga artificial de acuíferos. Y hoy día existen guías y normas, hay temas legales, de que si alguien tiene un derecho superficial no puede pasarlo al suelo, pero en fin, el Estado se está adaptando a eso. Y por otro, una medida como menos popular, pero no por eso menos necesaria. Existen muchos proyectos en carpeta sobre obras de regulación y embalse. Entonces, como Chile, en general nos estamos adaptando. Sabemos que el escenario que se viene es complejo, pero bueno, Trevor les puede hablar un poco más ahora de la visión global, pero para cerrar esta introducción, básicamente hay evidencia. O sea, nadie puede decir que no hay evidencia de cambio en precipitación y temperatura. Existe menos precipitación, temperaturas más altas, y esto trae consecuencias en los recursos hídricos. Menos nieve, menos caudal, y en algunas partes, por supuesto, podría haber un aumento. Y Chile está paso a paso adaptándose. El tema es que hay un delay entre los reportes de cambio climático, CEMIP 7, más o menos 5 años nos demoramos los científicos en procesar esa información. Y después de que generamos publicaciones, otros 5 años más pasan entre que los tomadores de decisiones les llega eso. Entonces, tenemos un delay como de 10 años de lo que se está produciendo versus lo que logramos en política. Así que con eso termina mi teloneo al profesor Trevor. So, thank you very much. Tendremos espacios para preguntas al final.
Muchas gracias, Miguel. ¿Estará la presentación ahí cargada?
Sí.
Okay, Trevor, it's your turn.
Do I have a little clicky thing?
No, we have the
The adapter. Okay.
So they didn't bring the adapter, so you have to change.
So just on there.
Yes.
Okay. Perfect. Thank you, Miguel. Thank you, Victor. It's really good to be here this afternoon with you, and I'll explain why in just a minute. But before I do so, I need your help. I need you to answer a very simple question by raising your hand or not. It would help me to understand if you understand my English. So, if we start with a scale of 1 is very little understanding of English, you don't even know what I'm saying now. 5 is a moderate understanding, and 10 is you're like a true English person in London. How many of you are 5 to 10 on that scale? How many of you are understanding what I say very well? Fantastic. Now, taken by definition, maybe just a small number may struggle a little bit with some of my language, but hopefully Victor might be able to help you with that, and Miguel a little bit later on. That's very good. I'm really pleased that your English is so good, and I apologise that my Spanish is not English. Thank you. So I said I'm really pleased to be here. So why am I pleased to be here? So I like to be sat, there's a spare seat over there, I like to be sat over there. 2 reasons. First of all, it would mean that I'm 14 years younger, and I could go out and party tonight. But there's also a more important reason. I really do believe this, that your careers over the next 40 years will probably be through one of the most important periods of human history in terms of how we manage resources, and civil engineering will be fundamental to that. How we plan for the future, and we make sure that humanity has sustainable access to resources, not just for your generation, but for future generations to come. So I think your careers are in a really, really interesting and exciting point in time. And I hope you feel the same way. And you may or may not, certainly by the end of this presentation today. So what am I going to talk about? We're going to talk about climate and challenges and opportunities for water and environment, climate. And I put the word in resilience there. And I'm going to keep coming back to that word, because I think that's probably the focus of what I'd really like to get to today, and sort of talk about your thoughts and my thoughts about that. This is a slide. I love this slide. I was in government at the time, and I was the executive manager for managing what was the most severe drought in the UK for over 50 years. We had the Olympics that year, we had the Queen's Jubilee, and she wanted to go down the River Thames on a boat for all the crowds, etc., etc. And we had an incredibly severe drought. And we got to the stage where effectively, you've heard of day zero with sort of South Africa and Cape Town, etc. But we had a day zero situation heading our way. And in London, we were only 4 months away from running out of water. And you might think, well, okay, we'll get through it, it will rain sooner or later, it'll be fine. But when you sit down in government with Treasury, with the Home Office, with security, with the Cabinet Office, and you go through what that means for a megacity or any city, in effect, of running out of water in the 21st century, when you think of the public health implications where there is no sanitation, where any water that does come out of the pipes is probably of a lower quality and will spread disease, when you think of the economic consequences of having to shut down the City of London because not only won't be any water on the streets, you certainly won't get water up to the top of high-rise buildings and sort of the central business district, etc. You think of the social implications. We started planning for putting bowsers and tankers of water on street corners. There simply aren't enough tankers in the UK to manage or to provide even the basic amount of water for 12, 15 million people over any length of time. And genuine concerns about civil unrest, and would we need armed guards on those tankers to manage the access to water? Because society can fall to bits really, really quickly, and access to water is just such a basic and fundamental need for people. And that's before we even get to the environmental impacts as well. So it was an incredible, poignant time for us in the country, a reminder of how reliant we are on planning to the future, and the fact that we can no longer rely on a simple periodicity of droughts and floods, etc. But actually there's enormous uncertainty for the future, because with climate change we understand and we can measure empirically the changes which are happening now over the last couple of decades. We have some good techniques for forecasting the future, but there's tremendous uncertainty in those forecasts, and it's managing that uncertainty which is really important. We can forecast maybe for climate. What we can't do is forecast very well for weather in the future, and the two are quite different. I'll come back to that. But you can see the reason I love this slide is because it's absolutely tipping down with rain. I think Victor was in the UK in this year. And what's also interesting is that we had built some major flood defences in parts of the country, and we had looked at historical planning parameters for floods, and then we added a 1 in 1,000 year tolerance for potential climate change in the future. The rainfall that happened at the end of this drought period overtopped those flood defences, which were 1 in 1,000 years. And it changed the way we thought about water and adaptation. And rather than just relying on hard engineering, which may or may not result in the right judgment, also thinking about softer options to manage floods, nature-based solutions, social resilience, etc., etc. So our whole culture and thinking about water and the environment and climate has changed because of these events, and that's only going to continue to happen. This slide here, I think this is what I said yesterday at the conference, this first bit. So water and sanitation services are in a process of accelerated transition. So we're at the start of something which is probably going to get even steeper in terms of the scale of change and challenge to societies, humanities, the economy and the environment. New and emerging challenges. And as these pressures and the trade-offs which are required associated with those, it won't just be water companies, it won't just be government, it won't just be society. There's going to be a much more systems-based approach to how we think and how we solve problems in the future. And that's much of the work that I do both in the UK and internationally, is thinking about systems planning and thinking about macroeconomics and geopolitics and how we can get the money to be spent and raise the money. But the important thing with climate change is spending that money wisely. Raising the money is relatively simple, but actually making really good decisions on what civil engineering interventions or what other soft interventions you do and in what combination is a really, really difficult task. So spending that money wisely. So governance, science and culture. And you can probably think of the dynamics between governance, science, engineering, and how they need to work better together. But culture, I don't know whether you think about. So there's a saying in the UK that we use, which is that culture eats strategy for breakfast. Does that make any sense to you as a saying? So you can produce lots of ideas, you can produce lots of policies, But culture is really important, both in the organisations but also in society. And that can take a long time to change. People have done things in a certain way in the past. And when you end up in companies and businesses, etc., I hope you will go into those businesses with new ideas. And how you change and influence the culture as you go through your career will be as important as all the technical knowledge that you have built up by doing this course and your future work. So I think that's really important. The other bit here is how do we understand what an objective view of climate change, how we get really good. You have the benefit of having really good academic input who will help you understand objectively what climate change is. But not everyone has access to that objective, science-based understanding of climate change. And, you know, I worry about those people out there who exaggerate climate change and go beyond what the science says, as much as those people that say that climate change is a hoax and it isn't real. Because if we exaggerate climate change and we go beyond the science without being objective and doing it in a managed way, we can actually undermine the confidence of the actions that we need to take, both in engineering, in science, in policy, in government, etc. So that's really interesting, is how do we get our information? Okay, I've done enough talking. I need you to help me. I need you to answer these questions, please. Are you going to be brave and answer some questions for me? So, nice simple one to get us going. What is climate change and what are the main challenges for water management? Don't worry too much about what is climate change. I think probably you're okay. But what are the things, if we're thinking about managing water sustainably in the future, what impacts could climate change have on that? Be brave, go on, shout at me. No? I can see some of you are thinking of saying something. Please do, go on. No? Okay, I'll be kind. I'm not going to point at people, don't worry, I wouldn't be that cruel. Okay. The second question, I'm going to give you a kind of answer in a minute, but you can tell me if your answer would have been different. What is resilience, and is it different than risk management? I presume you do quite a bit on risk management, and you probably do something on resilience as well. Do we understand the difference between the two? I think the difference is really important. You might have a different view. So what did I put down as my points? So when we're thinking about if the climate is changing and the weather is changing, what does that mean for the way that we manage and plan for water in the future? Well, first of all, and I think as Miguel, your slides were saying, you know, it's going to have an impact on availability. If it gets drier, there is less water available for society. So in the UK, there's three really important numbers with this: 66, 23, and 11. Can anyone tell me what they add up to? Oh, that is an easy one. It adds up to 100. So 100% of the water in the UK, in the south of the UK, 66% of the rainfall that falls evaporates back up there. And with climate change, with a general warming of the climate, that's likely to increase. So it's going to be more than 66. 23% is used by the environment. We need to keep flows in the rivers, infiltration for trees and plants and those kind of things, etc. And that need for water is likely to increase as well. With warmer weather, there'll be more evapotranspiration, crops grow for longer growing period, etc. And 11% is used by people. And we're going to come on to growth in demand in a minute. So if those three numbers equal 100, and each one of those numbers is going to increase, we exceed 100% of water, which simply can't happen, or can it? And I'll come back to that in a minute. So availability, both short term but also long term, is really important. What else should I put next? Water demand, housing, industrial and commercial. So our demand for water with a warmer climate generally in households is increasing. And societal changes, people like hot tubs and they like long showers, and society likes to use water in a quite profligate way. And that's a really big issue, but also an opportunity for how we manage sustainability. On the commercial side, and I've spoken to Victor about this, and I don't think this has happened in Chile yet, but maybe in the future. So we're getting a proliferation of what are called data centres. So these great big warehouses, which every time you stream a movie or go on YouTube, whatever, is having to go through these great big mechanisms that take an incredible amount of water to keep them cool. So we're seeing a big increase in water. We're starting to move to hydrogen as an energy source, which is also taking on water to do that. Decarbonation is taking more water, and the energy transition to low carbon economy is also taking more water. So we've seen a big increase in water demand. System complexity. So in the past we managed water just sort of in a silo. We sort of just thought about water resources or wastewater management, and that was it. And because we've reached 100% of capacity, we can no longer do that. Because every time we change agricultural policy and it needs more irrigation, or every time we change industrial policy or societal policy, all these things interact in a much more interactive way than maybe we've had in the past. So we can no longer work just as civil engineers or as water engineers or everything else. Every time we do something, it has an effect somewhere else in the system. And because there is no more spare capacity in the system, there is an impact we need to take account of. Geopolitical and macroeconomics, so we're seeing a big increase in population in the UK and in Europe generally. A lot of that is driven by geopolitics and it's driven by climate change because of the macroeconomics as well. So big population growth in sub-Saharan Africa, but actually very difficult for people to survive and prosper in that part of the world, and a general movement to the northern hemisphere from the southern hemisphere, from Africa and from parts of the Middle East for a whole variety of reasons. So that just exaggerates demand as well. And what I haven't got up there is of course mitigation and the low carbon agenda. What is resilience and is it different to risk management? So you may have different views. To Miguel may have different views, I don't know. But in the UK, the way we think about this is that risk management in the past was we'd look at the problem, we'd look at a desalination plant, and we'd say, what are the risks of that failing? And we'd try to manage those risks, backup energy security, having some spare filters in a shed down the road that we can bring in if we need to bring them in, etc. But with resilience, we look at it in a much more systems-based approach. So we look at all the interactions both with that desalination plant and all the system above and below that feed into it in a much more holistic way than we have done in the past. And I'll talk about that more in a minute. So, yes, it's a change, there we go. Sustainability. If we go back to the very basics, has anyone ever heard of a tragedy of the commons? It's a fundamental principle of sustainability. We don't tend to talk about it very much these days. 40 years ago, when I was a student, we did. Let's step back 40 years. What is the principle? So, Aristotle. Anyone heard of Aristotle? 300 BC, so over 2,000 years ago. So he allegedly said or wrote down, what is common to the greatest, to the people, number of people, has the least care bestowed upon it. So what is very easy and accessible, we care less about. And what Tragedy of the Commons is all about something called carrying capacity. So how much can the environment support in terms of natural resources? And in this case, it's access to grass on common land. And if there's 3 sheep in a big field with lots of grass, everyone's happy, you've got fat sheep, you've got happy farmers, and the environment can sustain that. As you gradually, people say, well actually, I'd like to put some sheep on there, I'd like to get some profit, and I'd like to get some meat from that process. You get to the stage where there's just too many sheep for the grass to regenerate in time, and therefore the sheep are less fat, the farmers are less happy. And ultimately, if I don't have any sheep on there, but actually I'd rather put a sheep on there and get a little bit of benefit, but by getting that little bit of benefit, I degrade that common even further. So without environmental economics, without regulation, access to all these common goods, and water is a common good, will be degraded. And that's why we have regulators, why we have policy, why we plan for the long term. So this is a really important concept. So that carrying capacity, we think there's a limited capacity of water. Okay, so water is pretty much finite. We can't really destroy it or create it in any meaningful quantities. We can simply adapt its status in some ways. But it is renewable, so the commons, it goes round in a hydrological cycle, which we spoke about just now, and we can do things with that. So what we can do by good science, good engineering, good governance and good policy is make that carrying capacity larger than it would be if we did nothing. So we can conserve that resource. We can desalinate, so we change unusable water into usable water. We can store that water in reservoirs from periods when there's too much to when there is too little. But we need good regulation and good policy to do that. And that is going to be a key part of, I think, your careers in the future, is how we do that even better than we've done it in the past, because of that pressure that I said on how much water we have compared to how much we need. So I'm going to talk about adaptive pathways in a minute. This is something you may do in your course, I don't know, and resilience. But what the future looks like, certainly in the UK, but also in many countries, is it's not just about creating more supply. It's about managing down demand. So over the next 5 to 10 years in the UK, our emphasis is investing on demand management. So reducing non-revenue water will mean that we save as much water as 3 big reservoirs could supply to the country. So really important, and probably about 10 desalination plants. If we can manage our demand for water down from 140 litres per person's day to 110, that's equivalent to another 3 reservoirs and probably another 8 desalination plants by taking those actions. So they're relatively cheap, they're relatively easy, but they require a social contract between government, water companies, regulators and society to do. But working with new supplies and managing demand in combination is a really powerful tool. I'm probably running out of time. Adaptive planning a little bit I'd like to come on to, because it's something we're putting a lot of time into effort in, and we're sort of changing how we do this, we're learning as we go. So adaptive pathways, you can see 2025, 2040, 2050, 2060, 2100. And this is a very simplified, it's much more technical than this. You can see how the demand for water is forecast to change each one of those steps. But because of the uncertainties, we have a number of branches. We go from 1 branch to 3 branches to 9 branches to multiple branches, etc. And what we can do is then plan for multiple futures. So we don't plan for a best guess future, we plan for multiple futures. And the things that we build and the actions that we take now mean that we can pivot to any of those futures. So it gives us much more resilience. We're not taking a guess and saying we hope it's going to be this. We're planning for a much broader range of the future. And again, I think I saw on one of your slides you were talking about sort of adaptive pathways, but yeah. But we talked about resilience. So how do you plan for resilience? So we've developed some technology and some approaches and some policies that, rather than doing risk management in isolation, we look at multiple criteria and make judgments into a mosaic model, which effectively tries to give us a resilience score. So a desalination plant is really resilient to a dry period because the sea is going to be there somewhere. It might be up or down a little bit, but it's going to be there pretty much somewhere. But you might have problems with energy security, you might have problems with materials, you might have problem with highly ionized water and whether you can mix it in the network, etc., etc. So every type of solution has its own characteristics. A reservoir is great if you get lots of winter rainfall, depending on how big a reservoir is. But actually if you get 3 or 4 or 5 or 10 years of low rainfall, like we've seen with the Hoover Dam in America and Lake Powell, etc., it just goes down every year. And it never really gets back up to where it needs to be. But each one of these types of approaches has its own benefits. It's how they work in combination is really important, and how this type of system and model helps us understand what combination gives us the greatest resilience for the uncertainty of the future. Because if you could tell me what the weather's going to be like in 2050, we could build the right solution for that. But we can't. We don't know what it will be. We have an idea it might be a bit wetter or a bit drier or a bit warmer or not, etc. But there's tremendous uncertainty. This is a bit of a systems-based bit, so we use a series of economic models to actually make those judgments as well. So we don't plan for least cost anymore. That's very old style, because least cost is probably not best value, so we look at value, not cost. Sustainability, resilience, system function, public best value and carbon, and we model multiple types of solutions, so for industry, agriculture, public water supply, all in combination, because there is no getting around the point we have to make trade-offs. Not everyone can have everything that they want. You need to make decisions. Otherwise, the climate will decide who gets the water, and it will be a real mess, and it will be very difficult for us to manage. So we're trying to make those decisions up front so that each sector can create the resilience that it needs. This is an adaptive pathway to sites and solutions. So you can see we start here up to 2030, splits into 3, then splits into 9, etc. And each of these blobs are different sizes. Some of them demand management, like non-revenue water and household consumption and industrial consumption. Others are reservoirs, desal plants, transfers, reuse, etc., etc. And what it means is that the investments we make here in the next 5 years still give us the choice to pivot to any one of those futures. So we're not locking ourselves into a situation that we wish we made a different decision now. It gives us lots of choices. It's a bit more expensive, but it's much better value for society and gives us much more resilience in the long term. So just in summary, and sorry I've lost track of time, hopefully I'm not too far over. So we think a mix of demand side and supply side. So non-revenue water, really, really key to get down, because why take water out of the environment? Why spend a lot of money in carbon treating it to a really high quality just for it to leak out of a pipe where it has no benefit for society or the environment in many cases? Metering and smart metering, so smart metering so people can see on their phone their water use and they can manage their water use and their bill and their carbon and their energy all together. Water efficiency, maybe some tariff signals, so some tariffs that incentivise people to use less water, etc. And on the supply side, storage, catchment, nature-based solutions, so using the environment, working with the environment, not just pouring concrete solutions. Reuse of water, politically, socially, quite controversial, but probably really important over the next 30 to 40, 50 years. And transferring water from areas where we have too much to where we have too little. You can see some of those big transfers and the schemes in that map there. And over on the right-hand side, I think, just in summary, some points. Managing uncertainty. If we knew what 2050 was going to look like, we could sort it now. We don't, and that's the problem. We have an idea of the direction of travel and the scale, and we have some brilliant science, but it's not deterministic, and we need to manage and be prepared for variance from what we plan for. System-based approach, not just thinking about sort of single solutions, but thinking about the knock-on effects throughout the system is really important. Ever stronger link between science, policy and government, and certainly in our country the links between science and policy have not been as strong as they needed to be. Politics tends to go off in its own direction sometimes, so working really hard to with that. Resilience as a change of approach, and I think I mentioned this earlier on, please remember, I think it's really important that culture eats strategy for breakfast. You might know, and you might be able to come up with some really good ideas, but bringing people along with you is going to be such an important skill in your career, I think, in the future. So please think very carefully about how you can do that and we can do that together. I hope that's been useful. I hope my English has not been too fast and you've been able to follow, and I've really appreciated your time this afternoon. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Trevor. Gracias, Miguel. Muchas gracias a todos. Y ahora vamos a dejar un pequeño espacio para preguntas, comentarios que podamos hacer para nuestras dos tremendas exposiciones del día de hoy. Así que los invito a levantar la mano, pueden hacer consulta en español o en inglés y acá vamos a tratar de ver cómo hacemos para responder. No sean tímidos, los invito a...
Yo tengo una pregunta respecto a una de las diapositivas del principio, respecto a la inundación que ocurrió en Londres, que consideraron como un periodo de retorno, o sea, que el evento fue un evento que ocurría cada 1000 años. Entonces, hablaron sobre formas como de mitigarlo, pero ¿cómo mitigan un evento de una magnitud de ocurrencia tan poco probable?
Okay, that you show at the beginning a slide of a flood in London. How do you mitigate an event of that magnitude?
Okay. So yeah, it's a great question. And that flood came at the end of a drought. That meant that the ground was very dry, and and therefore the water didn't infiltrate very well. So it was a very flash type event, and it exceeded our planned hard infrastructure. So we had built lots of flood walls, lots of big drainage pipes, etc. In a city, it's really, really difficult, because in London it's very difficult because there's so much hard ground. But what we've done in other parts of the country is nature-based solutions. So we've been planting trees upstream, we've been widening the channels, and we've been making sure that the agricultural use of the land enables as much infiltration before the water gets down. So in terms of river flooding, that's very effective. The type of flooding I showed there was what we call pluvial flooding. So it's surface runoff, it's everywhere. So it's not just in a channel, and that's much more difficult to manage. And the only way to do it is to really have some storage in the urban area, which is very expensive and very difficult, and also to increase the capacity. So in London, we've built what is called a super sewer. So it's about 5 times bigger than an underground tunnel. It's a massive tunnel, and it goes from one side of London to the other, and it intercepts that surface water from the streets going through London. And it hasn't been tested yet in terms of a really, really big storm, but all the best engineering gives us the best chance of helping to solve that problem. I hope that's helpful.
Thank you. ¿Una otra pregunta?
Es que habla de crear sistemas que eventualmente sean adaptables a distintos escenarios futuros. Pero esa inversión tengo que hacer a día de hoy y tengo que empezar a crear, invertir o materializar ciertas cosas. Entonces, ¿qué características tiene un sistema que sea adaptable a un escenario futuro?
Okay, so you talk about adaptable system for the future. Which features, characteristics, the system that you talk, you can give some examples.
Okay, so when we look at the future, the type of future parameters that we're looking at,
What do you, ¿a qué te refieres con los sistemas?
Que hablaba de que el futuro es incierto, entonces ante ciertos escenarios yo puedo adaptar la infraestructura o la inversión a.
So the scenarios have climate scenarios within them. They have social adaptation scenarios. So what will society look like in 10, 20, 30, 40 years' time? How much water will they want to use? How will they treat water? How will they pay the water? How affordable will it be? What will be government policy? Will it be quite harsh, or will it be quite left-wing and liberal in its approach? And what will the economics be? What will the macroeconomics and the geopolitical situation be? Will there be big population increases? Will there be lots of equity and debt available to build infrastructure? Or will money be very tight and be quite difficult to do so? So you look at each one of those in combination. What happens if you have very high climate change but very low access to money? You know, how might you manage that situation, and what would the gaps be? Or there might be lots of money available. We see the economies as being very healthy and very positive, and quite low climate change. You know, how will we spend that money wisely? So it's a really complex process. There's lots of judgments within that, and the key to doing it well is to involve lots of different types of people from outside who don't have a particular view on these things, but look at it in a very objective way. So that's why very recently the ex-governor of the Bank of England has come in to look at water in the UK. He knew nothing about water at all, but he's a very clever guy. He understands economics, he understands social politics, and he could look at the things that we've been doing and say, well, yeah, I can see why you've done that. Have you thought of this, or have you thought of that? So it's really good to get an outside view on these things.
And do you have any specific example about that? For example, the part that you talk.
Okay, yeah. So the Thames sewer, or the Thames Tideway sewer, we haven't had flooding in London to the catastrophic level that it could have been. So I was really pleased that the government and the companies and the regulators agreed to what was a really big investment. They put £50. So how many dollars is that? A lot.
$70 million?
Yeah. So £50 per person.
Ah,
so
each
one of us would pay £50
Okay.
extra. So a massive
In the
investment.
tariff.
Yeah, on the tariff. So that investment was a sign of government doing well. So, you know, we all complain, well, we complain about our government, so I'm sure you don't complain about yours. But I am pleased that they have done things like the Climate Change Act in 2009. So it's quite easy for governments to think about short-term problems and what's immediate and what will affect, you know, the next election. But actually, governments can think about intergenerational problems as well. And I think our job is to encourage them to do that, to think beyond the next election, and that's maybe the work that we very often do. I hope that's helpful.
Thank you very much.
Well,
And yes.
So maybe to finish, we are the largest civil engineering department in Chile. So I would like to give you like a motivational speech to this. People will make a change and will have to work. Please, you can give a final word to our students. Yes.
inspirational. Oh, yeah. I don't know. I don't know what to say. I mean, I said something at the beginning, and I do believe it. And that is, I think your career is going to be incredibly exciting if you want it to be. It's such an important time, the next 40 years, because in 40 years' time, you could be stood in front of students like this, and I don't know what you will say to them. I'm sure it will be different than what I have said today. But I think that journey you're on, if you want to do it, and if you want to be part of the future, and you may not want to, and that's absolutely fine, is incredibly exciting. And I just hope you support each other, and you can work with people in a really productive way. I don't think there's much point in shouting at people and telling them they're wrong. If people have a different view to you, the one thing you need to do is understand why they have that view. Have they seen different evidence? And if they have, ask to see that evidence and be prepared to change your mind. And if they haven't, they just think they believe something. You know, use the evidence you have, but also understand why they have those points of view. Because, you know, changing people's minds, coming to a common view of what actions are needed, you know, is going to be super important, because the future is not business as normal. It's going to involve an enormous amount of change, and change isn't easy for everyone. And I think you are going to be really important to helping that change be in the right direction and to make it actually happen. So I'm not sure that's inspirational, but I wish you the very best of luck with everything that you do.
Thank you so much.
Bueno, para cerrar, a las personas que no sé si nos siguen viendo en streaming,
No hay preguntas.
ya. Pero pensando en este tipo de cosas, nuestro departamento va a lanzar el próximo año nuestro diplomado en gestión de amenazas de inundación ante cambio climático. Ustedes ya están haciendo esa formación y la idea es que puedan también ayudarnos a socializar. Y para seguir compartiendo este tema, les invitamos a un café y galletas que vamos a compartir acá.